Beast, Chapter 30. Trade ships could be as different as the species that crewed them. Colors, sizes, and layouts all varied widely depending on where you traveled. Generally speaking, practical designs were preferred, but for ships that did their business with orbital elevator stations, being aerodynamic wasn't a huge priority. The shields generally made up for that if they did business on the surface anyways, so designs often held an artistic flourish. Yi Tal's ship was not one such vessel. Despite that, it was her pride and joy. A giant, gray, rectangular block, it was a huge, bulky thing made for large hauls of cargo. It was putting it lightly to say that the ship was worth more to her than her life. A technological wonder that could accelerate past the speed of light, the heavy freighter ran on older systems than most of its fellow vessels. On its journeys in the expanse between worlds, a massive FTL driver, 57th generation, was what pushed the bulky thing onward in a constant increase of speed before obtaining enough inertia to trigger the smaller secondary FTL boost. Technically, single FTL drivers could do this on their own, but Yi Tal was holding the ship together by means of recycled discount parts, owed favors, blood, sweat, and tears. All of those, and her crew. A ship's crew was a family, not by blood, but by the literal nature of their career. When you were stuck in a confined space with others for a long trip, you either got off on the next port or learned to live with them. Considering the line of work was stressful and dangerous at times, learning to live with your fellow crew generally meant forming strong bonds. To leave a crew was to leave a family that had chosen you as much as you had chosen it. That made it hurt all the more when Yi Tal thought of those who had left. Hit after hit, it slammed into her. Those had made it abundantly clear she was not the shipmaster they had joined to follow. She could never hope to be. Of the original crew, almost half had left, putting in their resignation to leave for other vessels. They had picked strangers over Yi Tal, and that was truly a stinging blow that kept her up some rotations, simply wondering if she could have done something differently, achieved something better. She never could give herself a solid answer. Her best options all seemed to lead to ruin no matter what she did. For those who stayed, she was thankful, but one had to wonder if the others had been right to leave. Things had certainly been better on board the freighter. Originally, her crew had been a mix of species who had been gathered under the steady allegiance of her partner. Individuals of talent and skill had been drawn to him, as if his personality held a pulling force akin to gravity. The crew that had followed him had been held to the ship by the simple density of his leadership and presence, but now he was gone. In his absence was a vacuum she alone could not fill no matter what she did. She was a fighter, not a leader. Having left the military to join the crew dozens of cycles ago, she had adapted to her role. While her partner had gathered the crew and led them with that spark few shipmasters could ever hope to obtain, she had protected them from the mundane. She handled the money, maintained security, and dealt with the paperwork. He had given them a path. She had made sure they kept to it. She had been the realist who backed the brave, but she had never been a leader. It was times such as this that she grew envious of her younger self all those cycles ago, before she bonded her life to another for emotion and family. Military service may have been dangerous, but there was much less to worry over. The guild had it right. Everything in life was a trade. His neck tingled with casual pinpricks, caressing the skin and nerves beneath. It didn't hurt, but it brought the man's attention to the direction a majority of sensations seemed to coalesce. He couldn't ignore it, and felt strongly as though he shouldn't. Above his head, staring down from the balcony, was an alien. Actually, it was the alien, the one with the strange scaled coat. Nearby there were others, many dressed in the uniforms which marked their roles on the ship. Their solemn stares all focused down on him in silence. None of the usual melodic conversations could be heard. He had seen a variety of them while in his captivity, but never so many at once since his purchase. Unlike the crowd during that spectacle, none of these clothed in the same manner as the one meeting his gaze. She was the only one who wore anything that made her stand out from the rest at all. Along the perimeter, he turned slightly to see what resembled armor had been placed on the perimeter balcony, with large insulating pieces that interlocked in a strange insulating fashion. Spacesuits of some kind, perhaps. He scanned the crowd and searched for his visitor in white. Perhaps she was here as well. The collar began to grow painful, and his eyes snapped back to the cloaked figure. He met her blue-eyed gaze with curiosity as he smiled and raised a hand in a short wave. That gaze seemed to widen, and the tension in his collar rose to more painful levels in a quick pulse, causing him to jump up instinctively. It was like he had been burned or sprayed by some hot steam, and his sudden panic threw him dramatically far forward and away from the onlookers. Catching his balance and rubbing his neck, the man turned back to face his captors. Once again he heard the murmuring songs of astonishment and fear. For whatever reason, when he moved quickly, the aliens found reason to talk about it. The one with the cape, though, silenced it with a single note. The rest of the group went back to total silence in a heartbeat. She was in charge then. He supposed that made sense. Her thin body seemed to glide as she walked to the elevator in the corner and pressed her hand to a pad on the wall. Alone, she rode the platform smoothly down to his level, leaving the others behind to watch. The man thought he recognized one of the smaller figures who made a move as if to follow, but was held in place by another. Movement above drew attention away from the interaction and back to the center of the balcony where the cloaked figure had stood before. Taking her place on the bridge, another alien had appeared. He, or it, was of a similar build to the guards who had shocked him, and it leveled what seemed like a rifle on the railing. The device pulsed in a shallow light along what appeared to be a barrel, and its color changed from a light green to a deeper red. Slowly, the man put his hands above his head. There was very little that made sense in his current situation, or if he was going to be honest with himself. Very little that made sense even in his past few periods of consciousness. But he knew what to do now. He wasn't going to move, not one damn inch. As Yital walked, steadily towards the beast, it seemed to ignore her and fall into a strange position, its upper limbs raised. Perhaps an aggressive posture to make it seem larger and more dangerous. She tried to read further into it, but could only find that it almost seemed to be intentionally looking away from her. It was looking past her, to her right. As she quickly stole a glance, she saw her bridge steward pointing a light rifle at the beast with a glassy-eyed stare of challenge. The beast must have seen one before and was frightened. "Good," she thought as she approached. "You are mine, beast," she sang as she lightly touched her wrist. The beast trembled but did not move. It turned its eyes with those strange white perimeters towards her directly. It was unbelievably intimidating close up. Standing in height that dwarfed even the tallest of her species, it was built with a solid weight. Siza had told her of the scans from its decontamination, and she thought of the bones which lay under. That bulk, enforced with calcium to have a strength that rivaled metal alloys. She sang in a fiercer tone now, trying to hide her discomfort. Under its strange skin muscles attached to those bones seemed to ripple with tension as it took in slow, deep breaths. "You will cause no harm to those of this ship. You will stay here until you die defending it and myself, just as all beasts of the ship have done before you." She paused to try to establish some mental effect through the connection, and then pushed harder on the bracelet upon her wrist. "You will obey me, on or off of this ship in all things." The beast shook, pain visible now. It curled its lips to reveal white teeth, some of which seemed to have a pointed edge. Its native diet had likely subsided on more than just organic protein matter presented to it while on her ship. Not purely carnivorous, but certainly not purely herbivorous either. Tension seemed to erupt from it as it clenched muscles together. Perhaps she should have armed more than just the steward. That thought floated in the background as she focused her link with the beast. It was strong. Now Yitala had no doubts. This creature must have come from a planet with gravity far greater than that of their home world. She looked closer at it and saw scars riddled its body, and a large one rested at its throat. Its world must be incredibly violent to have caused such wounds. She would have to take a risk then. It wasn't safe, but it was her best option. Whatever primal instincts drove this creature, she would need to establish herself above them. Yital had to break it now, to be certain her crew and spawn would be safe. She twisted the brace on her wrist as far as it would go and shouted her words, half in bravery, half in terror as the creature seemed to spasm in reaction. "You will obey me!" The creature opened its jaws and threw its head back as if to bellow, but no song sang from its lips. As she stared at it holding her brace, it lowered its head and brought its eyes back to hers. Liquid ran from them, and drops fell to the floor. Was it bleeding? Bleeding from its eyes? It was defiant to the point of blood, to not sing out and admit defeat. It would rather bleed. Her own eyes widened as it moved, slowly, each pulling tension within its body, a concentrated effort. It took a single step towards her, then another. Yital held the bracelet to its maximum position. The collar on the beast next would be issuing enough pain to cripple anything she had seen or heard of in her lifetime, perhaps even kill. But the creature was withstanding, and it was coming closer. Gaining ground in slow but dedicated rhythm, it advanced. She held her ground. Panic or retreat would cause this whole effort to have been a waste. That said, it wasn't even a unit from her, and it's bleeding. Eyes stared as they dripped the clear fluid down, its strange skin to land at their feet. Yital fought the urge to scream. It was more than a beast. It was a nightmare. Why had she ever thought it docile? It reached for her. A crack rang out in the hangar, the sound of a shot being fired. The beast spun backwards to land on its side, its limb clenched in pain. She turned to see her steward preparing to fire again, popping another light round into the weapon. "You are not to interfere!" she sang, the room reverberating in her anger, covering her fear with authority. She turned and advanced towards the steward in cold rage. Even 10 units below him, she could see how he seemed to deflate under her gaze. "That beast is to be the guardian of this ship. Cost me a small fortune, and you would risk seriously injuring it during its first training?" Her fear was entirely gone now. She was truly furious. The creature would likely be skittish now, more difficult to tame. She was certain uninterrupted she could have bonded the beast if it had not been for "Shipmaster behind you!" Yital barely had time to turn and realize her mistake before it was upon her. Siza had been there when his father was killed. He remembered in terrible detail the 5-tailed spitter which his father had tried to tame, and he remembered its violent rampage afterwards. His father had died stalling the beast long enough for it to be put down, but the damage had been done. Siza had not been strong enough to do anything but watch. His song was not yet formed when it had occurred, but he swore he would never let it happen again. The shot had been true, striking the limb of the beast as it made motion to reach his mother, but it had not been as effective as expected. As Yital had turned from the ship beast, it had continued to watch her with dedicated purpose as it held its wound. The creature was still bleeding from its eyes, but its skin was not pieced. Only a slight burn seemed to indicate it had just been shot by a light rifle. It was merely astonished. That meant a dermal layer unheard of in any of the civilized worlds. That meant a creature from a quarantined planet. What happened next belied intelligence of a predator. As it had reacted the instant it recognized attention was elsewhere, and that the rifle was of no further threat. It had the shipmaster pinned before anyone could react, and her scream curdled Siza's blood. It had cleared the distance with a single lunge. The beast that leapt upon his mother was fast, and it was strong, but Siza thought of none of these things as he leapt from the walkway down to the cargo bay floor and rolled with the landing to come up in a dead sprint. His mother was pinned, the creature's limbs holding hers down as if her struggles were nothing. Another shot rang out and hit the beast in the back, but only a small singe remained as evidence. It would kill her if they couldn't stop it, Siza was certain. Singing a song of battle, he crashed into the side of the beast and unleashed upon it with all of his might. His blows fell from it as though he was hitting the walls of the ship. It was dense, solid in weight that did not appear possible considering its size, and he was having no effect on it at all. He prepared all his force into a kick which landed him on his tail, and another shot rang out. That was the last one. Light rifle rounds were expensive, and the ship had never needed to issue more than 3 to any crew member per trip. His mother sang a quiet song of pain as Siza rose to try once more, only to fail. He screamed frustration at the beast as he watched his mother struggle uselessly beneath it. Not again. He wouldn't let this happen again. Throwing himself on the beast's back, he gripped its neck with all his force, lashing at it with his tail like a whip. He would save her. He had to save her. Suddenly he felt himself rise as the beast lifted up, away from his mother. He felt a solid grip clench his limbs as if he were made of rubber. The monster had turned on him and was lifting him off the ground like he weighed nothing. He felt his tail begin to swish in panic, its flailing only unsettling him more. He was going to die. He was set gently on his feet. Siza opened his pale blue eyes and found the creature standing before him with a calm expression. It moved its jaw as if to sing, but no sound came out. With a slow motion, it stepped back and away from the hymn and turned to glance at Yital. She warily was rising to her feet, her tail swishing in discomfort and pain, but not agony. As she rose, she reached for her wrist, but gasped in shock. Though not visible from a distance, the brace was shattered, cracks riddled though the silver material. Behind them, the elevator dropped to allow several more of the crew down to their level, each dressed in mechanized armor meant for use in cargo lifting, an impromptu effort of rescue that had arrived too late. They warily approached and waited for their orders, and Yital rose fully to her feet. The apparent danger was over, and they were reluctant to approach the creature without cause. The beast turned to Shipmaster then and met her confused gaze. Clear blood still ran from its eyes as it blinked slowly. It concentrated as it moved its limbs and raised a 5-membered hand to its scarred throat. Air fell from its chest in long bursts as it repeated a quiet song which Siza could barely make out. It sounded of sadness. As the others slowly backed away, he felt the weight of what had just occurred hit like a ton of bricks. The pain he had just endured had not been ignored or avoided, only temporarily held at bay. Reacting to a huge rush of adrenaline, he had rode the rush until it had all come to a sudden stop. Only after the man had broken that horrible bracelet could he risk coming back into his own mind. There was something almost human about these aliens, and that had brought the violent outburst to a crashing halt just as quickly as it had started. The youth protecting its elder, the reckless bravery of a child protecting its mother. He knew what it was. Somehow he knew what it was. All he had wanted was for the pain to stop. He didn't want to hurt them. The cold metal felt like ice as he lay upon the floor. Where was he? Where was his home? So many questions, but the man lacked even a voice to ask them.